Hi there, welcome to Unit 8 Learning Outcome. I can identify and classify polynomials. So we have a lot of vocabulary. I took some of this from the web because I thought it summarized things really well, and because I wanted to point out that there are resources that you can go to. So I got this from mathplanet.com. So you can feel free to go there and look even more about polynomials and monomials. So first off, a monomial is a number, a variable. Okay, so this is vocabulary, so you should know that. A monomial is a number, variable, or a product of a number and a variable where all exponents are whole numbers. So if you look, all of these are monomials. They are all numbers or variables or product. Okay, what does product means? Product means multiply. So this is like 2 times P times Q. Okay, so that's a monomial. As opposed to these things, these are not monomials because if you look, there's a plus sign here. This is dividing by a variable. We can't have that. This has a variable in the exponent, just like our last unit. And here we have a negative exponent. Okay, so that means that in those examples, the exponents are not whole numbers. So they don't fit the criteria. Okay, the next vocabulary word we have is the degree of the monomial is the sum of, okay, so sum, what does sum mean? Sum means add. Okay, so the sum of the exponents of all included variables. Constants have a monomial degree of 0. So if we look, okay, so here's a constant. So make sure you know that and recognize that. There's a constant. By the way, I hope you are taking time to pause and write all this down and rewatch parts that you need to, because that's really important. Okay, so this is a constant 42 because it's just a number by itself. Since there's no variable, we would say the degree is 0. Here, 5x, okay, well, 5 has a degree of 0, x has a degree of 1, so the degree of that monomial is 1. 14, x to the second, or to x to the 12th, so that degree is 0 plus 12, so that's 12. Here, 2pq, okay, well that's like 2 times p to the first times q to the first. So the 2 has a degree of 0. Each of these has a degree of 1, so the degree of the monomial is 2. Okay, so take some time, write down your thinkings about this, any questions you have about that. We're not done. So pause it if you need to write things down, and let's move on. So next up we have some more vocabulary. So if you look, polynomial is a monomial or sum, remember that means add, of monomials. Term, each monomial that makes up a polynomial. So that's how many terms there are. The degree of a polynomial is the greatest degree of the polynomial's terms. Whew, that's tricky. And then finally, standard form. When a polynomial is written, so the degree of the variables decrease from left to right. So we always want the variables exponents to be decreasing left to right. So if we look here, this is written in standard form because it goes x to the third, x to the second, x to the first, and then there's nothing. So it would be like x to the 0. Okay, so this is standard form. So I'm going to put all that here, that this is standard form. In this standard form, we can find out a lot of information about the polynomial. So for example, we can see that the degree of the polynomial, so the biggest, right, the greatest degree of the polynomial's terms, the greatest degree is 3. So this is a third degree polynomial. Okay, we can figure out how many terms there are. So here's a monomial, that's one term. Here's a monomial, that's 2 terms. Here's a monomial, 3, and a monomial, 4. So it's a third degree polynomial. There are 4 terms. When it's written like this, we can see the leading coefficient. So the leading coefficient is the coefficient that's in front of the biggest degree monomial. So that 2 is the leading coefficient. Okay, but it has to be written in standard form to see that piece of information, that important piece of information. Okay, and finally, that number all by itself is the constant term. Ooh, so look at all those things we can figure out. Leading coefficient, the degree of the polynomial, we can figure out how many terms there are, and we can find the constant term. And that's why we need to write it in standard form. So let's look at an example. Okay, so here's a polynomial. No matter what, you can always figure out how many terms there are, but the very first thing you should do is ask yourself, is this in standard form? Well, I can see it's not because this exponent of 3 is not in the front. So it'd be really important to rewrite that. So, oh, and hey, this exponent of 4, that's not in the front either, and that's a bigger exponent. Okay, so let's rewrite. So the biggest exponent is first. Okay, I can see that this is negative 5x to the 4th. Okay, the next biggest exponent is that 3, so plus x to the 3rd. Okay, where's the next biggest exponent? Okay, right here, minus 2x squared. Next up we have plus x. And finally, okay, I don't see a negative in sign in front of that, so I'm going to put a plus 7. Okay, so we've written it in standard form, so it's decreasing. All right, so things that we can write about this. Okay, how many terms are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so there are 5 terms. It's the degree. What's the degree? So the biggest exponent is 4, so it's a 4th degree. Okay, the leading coefficient. Okay, now that we have it in standard form, we can see that that leading coefficient is negative 5. And finally, we can talk about the constant term. Okay, so the number all by itself, oh, right there, 7. Here we go, so the constant term is 7. Okay, but it's really important. Notice it was much harder to gather that information when it looked like this. That's why we want standard form. And there is a part of the test that just asks you to write things in standard form. So that's really important. Okay, last bit of it. We have a couple more vocabulary words. So we've already talked about what a monomial is. It's when there's one term. But there's a couple other special names. So binomial is when there's two terms. So if you can see, there's 1, 2, so that makes it a binomial. Next up, trinomial. 1, 2, 3 terms. So that's a trinomial. Think about monocycle, bicycle, and a tricycle. I know also sometimes we call it a unicycle, but it's also called a monocycle. Okay? We don't often use quadrinomial or quintinomial. So these ones are the ones that you will be asked to know for the test. Okay? Monomial, binomial, trinomial. Really, if it's 4 or more terms, it's a polynomial. We don't use a special name, in other words, polynomial. They all, by the way, they all are polynomials. It's just that these three have special names. If it's 4 or more, we just call it a polynomial and not a special name. Okay, now this was a lot of information to digest. Okay, I want you to write one new vocab word. So write one thing you learned that was new, vocabulary word that was new, that you either have a question about or that you feel like you learned really well. Question or comment about the word. All right, and I will see you in class. Thank you so much.